We've got a surprise interview at a man who just committed to the University of Nebraska over this past weekend, a 4-star tight end. All right, Mr. Luke Sorensen chose the Huskers over Ole Miss and Penn State when he announced this past weekend he was going to come join Nebraska and the Big Red. How you doing, Luke? How you doing, my friend?
I'm amazing. How are you guys?
Dude, I'm pumped. I'm pumped to have you a part of Husker Nation. I'm pumped to have you on air. Talk to me, because Nebraska is making some big waves when it comes to making big impact on big-time recruits across the country, such as yourself. What stands out to you about Nebraska? What made you choose Nebraska to come join the Huskers?
You know, at the end of the day, it was the coaches and the people for me. You know, obviously, anywhere in the Big Ten, the ACC, you're going to find good coaches, but I felt Nebraska was just something different, you know. I think Matt Rule is one of the greatest coaches alive. I think that what he does is special, especially in college football. Coach Satterfield, the tight end coach, is one of my guys. He's one of my favorite coaches I've ever been recruited by. And I just think that there's a lot of special things coming to Nebraska that a lot of people aren't going to know about until it hits them.
So I know when you announced, you talked about the culture at Nebraska. I got one of your quotes in front of me. You said, and I quote in the end, it was the culture of the program, the character of the coaches, and the expectation to perform and win at a high level, not just for next season, but for the future of the university. They believe in me, not just as a player, but as a person, end quote. And Matt Rule has talked about not just recruiting highly ranked recruits, but recruiting the right type of person and player that fits in with what they're trying to do there. What about you fits in with what Matt Rule is trying to do? Because obviously there's a great fit there.
Yeah, so Matt Rule is all about development. You know, I've only been playing football for about 2 years, right? I've been playing, last year was my first year playing tight end, right? So I'm still learning about this game. I'm still new to all this, you know, all the lifting and all the football specific training, right? So I'm all new to that. And I feel that Matt Rule and Coach Satterfield are going to make me the best tight end possible. And I think that they do that through the intentionality in their coaching. I think they're very intentional coaches. They know what it takes to win, and they understand what it takes to be a good tight end. And so, you know, Coach Corey, who's the strength and conditioning coach over there, I felt like their nutrition and their strength and conditioning programs is the best in the country without a doubt. They spend the most money on it. They're the most intentional. The stuff that they have is, you know, high next level. You're trying to like Olympic professional athletes, which is what we are at the end of the day. And so I feel like a combination of all those things is what's going to make you the best tight end. That's not at the University of Nebraska.
So it's interesting because you alluded to this is only, you know, about your second season playing football. You were, as a freshman, you weighed 185 pounds. You were actually, I believe, a right tackle. Then you moved to tight end before your sophomore year. All right, now you're up to 6'3.5", 6'4", 250 pounds with some big hands, size 17 shoe. Talk to me about, it's a two-part question because my dad wouldn't let me play football until I was in 7th grade. Okay, so I felt like that was a little bit later on start. Obviously, you started even a little bit later on. What was the reason for playing a little bit later? And the second part of that question, you already clearly have a love for the game. What has endeared you to football that makes you love it so much already?
You know, the reason why I started late was, you know, my dad was a basketball player. He grew up on Long Island, right? He's a big dude, about 6'6", 6'7", you know, big basketball player. Both my uncles played football. One of them played, he was a walk-on at USC, right? So there was a lot of football and basketball in my family, but my first, like, sport that I really loved was baseball. That's what I dedicated all my time to. I played on travel teams. I played you know, high-level baseball. And then after that, I picked football up, and I was like, wait a minute, like, this is what I want to do. Like baseball is cool and all, but, like, this is what I'm meant to do is play football. And so even though I started late, I felt like I still had that athletic ability because I played a bunch of sports growing up. I did karate and taekwondo for about 7-8 years, a lot of jiu-jitsu stuff, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I wrestled. I played rugby. I played pretty much every sport I ended up playing or trying out at least. And so I felt I always had that athletic ability. And then, you know, once I got into football, the reason why I just loved it so much was because I grew up with two twin sisters. So there wasn't a lot of rough housing. You know, most guys that get to grow up with brothers, have the ability to kind of train with their brothers and mess around and stuff. I didn't get that. And so I felt like football gave me an opportunity to kind of fight for someone, you know, for, you know, 10 other guys on the field, which is why I felt like the greatest team sport is football. And that's why.
All right, man. So I've always been intrigued by self-defense, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, taekwondo, etc. What's the highest level of belt that you've reached? I know you've done quite a few of them, but what's the highest level of belt that you've reached in one of those?
Highest level, I think I stopped I forget how the rankings go. I was like 1 or 2 before black, so I was decent, but I stopped too young to get to black belt or anything like that. But wrestling, I wrestled my first year doing actual wrestling. I wrestled varsity at 179s and then 197s, and then from there after that I just focused on football. But my freshman and sophomore year was 179 at varsity.
Man, I tell you what, nobody's going to want to get around to fisticuffs with Luke in practice. This dude knows how to defend himself. He knows how to take it to somebody else. It's interesting. I've always said don't mess with wrestlers, not just guys with Brazilian jiu-jitsu, taekwondo, karate, etc., but wrestlers. You don't mess with wrestlers as a general rule.
You never want to mess with a wrestler.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. So you talked about the weight room. You talked about the facilities. You talked about the strength and conditioning coach, Corey Campbell. Dude, the weight room there is just freaking phenomenal. I'm not just saying that. I walk in, I'm like, holy crap. Talk to me about your impression when you first saw the facilities in the weight room.
My first time walking in that weight room, I stepped foot. My unofficial visit, I stepped foot, and then all the players already know who I am. They start running up to me, dog pile. It was just awesome, right? And so it was a great warm welcome by the players, and then just seeing them how they work. I mean, you want to talk about a blue blood team that just works and is all about getting better at football. You look at Nebraska weight room, because the way they just crank things out, it's a well-oiled machine. Some weight rooms are about the hype. Some weight rooms are about the quote-unquote grind. This was just about getting it done and getting it done right. And so that's what I like, because that's how Service's weight room is run, because we have our head coach, Matt Chandler, who was a Marine. And so he runs it just like Coach Corey does. And so it's very cool to see the two correlate.
Look, it's interesting. Your recruiting profile definitely includes that you're a phenomenal blocking tight end. And we've already talked about maybe some of the reasons that kind of go on there, but that's usually not just happenstance. There's an art and there's a physicalness to that. So I got to ask you, what do you like more, putting somebody on their butt or going out there and catching the ball?
I think that the notion behind me being just a blocking tight end is incorrect. Obviously, I love to block, but the reason why a lot of people don't see me as a pass catcher is because we didn't have a quarterback my junior year. Our quarterback got hurt week 2, so we were playing with the freshmen. But at the end of the day, I'm always going to take being able to say, I put you on your back as you're going to be 4 yards off the ball, and now, it's a 1st and 10, you ran inside zone over, and you can just ground and pound the run. Pass catching, I think, is cool, right? I think that it should be an equal split. You got to be able to do both, but I think an inline tight end that can block the way I do is a lot more valuable than a big receiver. I think that I will always take, driving a guy off the ball than running the big route or something like that.
I will never forget, this is years ago, I interviewed Will Bolt, Nebraska's baseball coach. I was 5, 6, 7 years ago, and I interviewed John Cook about a year later, Nebraska's volleyball coach at the time. And I asked them both the same question. I said, if you could give any piece of advice to a young athlete out there, what would it be? And they said to play multiple sports. And the reason for that is a lot of times when you narrow down too soon, you almost cap out too soon. And sometimes you can wear out mentally, fatigue physically, wear out the same body parts. But if you played multiple sports, and dude, you played a ton as you laid out, your best future, your best development is still in front of you, because you're barely scratched the surface of what you can do, especially since you just started playing football. And it's interesting because I'm not just saying that because Luke's on air. If we were to go to break, I would have said that the next break, because a lot of times those are the guys that will take off when they go to the next level of college and develop, because they barely scratched the surface. So Luke, first of all, welcome to Nebraska. Welcome to the Husker Brotherhood. Thanks for taking the time to join me. And I can't wait to see what you do once you don the Nebraska end.
I appreciate you guys for having me on. I love doing this type of stuff. So thank you guys.